Good morning. Well, I'm going to look today at another part of Jewish life, and that is the great feasts which they keep. These were given to them through Moses, and it was explained to the people how they should relate to these different occasions. It became a calendar which governed their lives and helped them to understand what it was that God was saying to them and what the relationship to God was truly all about. The first great feast, of course, was the Feast of Passover. This showed the people, or reminded the people rather, about how they had been released from slavery in Egypt. It's been 3,500 years since this happened. The Jewish people still keep the Feast of Passover. Not only do they keep the Feast of Passover, but they keep the Feast of Unleavened Bread, which follows it. See, when the people came out of Egypt, they departed from Egypt so quickly that they didn't have time for their bread to mature and to gradually raise with the effect of yeast. So when they came out, the bread that they made was in fact unleavened bread. It hadn't been leavened in this particular way. And so for 7 days after the Feast of Passover, we have this great Feast of Unleavened Bread, a memorial to them of the angel of death passing over the houses of the Israelites who were in Egypt because they were marked with the sign of the blood, and killing the firstborn of Egypt, a great act which forced them to be thrown out of Egypt. And they came out of Egypt with all their time of slavery set behind them. And God is bringing them out into the desert in order that he could now train them for a future which was to come. But every year, at a particular time of the year, in the month of Nisan, usually in our April, but changing each year because it changes with the actual sign of the moons. Each year the date actually changes, but we come to the great Feast of Passover when they keep this feast and remember this feast. And part of that feast is that probably the youngest member of the family should say to the oldest member of the family, "Why is this night different from all other nights?" And once again, all the story of what happened in Egypt is recounted as they explain to everybody present all the events that took place at that time and how God called them from being a slave race into being his children that he was going to train for his purposes. The Feast of Passover followed immediately by the Feast of Unleavened Bread, a time when they just go through about their normal business. The first day of the feast, well, that is a non-working day. The last day of the feast, that again is a holiday. But in the meantime, they just remember all that God has given them in the time that he's called them out of slavery and all that he's done for them throughout the years. We come now to the next of the feasts. It is said, on the day following the first Sabbath after Passover, you will keep the Feast of First Fruits. You will bring to the temple the very best of the fruit that the land has produced, and offering it up to God as a sacrifice, you will thank God for the first fruits that you have been given, as you pray for the harvest which is going to come throughout the year. Now, I want to point this out to you simply because God has Christianized these feasts. When Passover was taking place, when Jesus was arrested, when he was crucified on that particular day. So as the Jews remembered the lamb being killed and the blood being put on the doorposts of their houses to allow the angel of death to pass over them, so on that particular feast, Jesus was crucified on Calvary, and his blood shed there was to give life to all those who would come to him and accept him as Saviour and Lord. Then he was buried in the tomb. Now, many people think that his crucifixion took place on a Friday, because as his body was hanging on the cross, people said to the Roman authorities, the body cannot be on the cross for the next day, for the next day is a special Sabbath of the Lord. And so, in fact, the criminals alongside him had their legs broken, and he was found to be dead. All three bodies were taken off the cross before the end of the day of Passover. And people assume that the following day was, in fact, a Saturday. But it wasn't. It was the first day of unleavened bread, and they wouldn't allow the bodies to be on the cross for those days. In fact, Jesus was, in fact, crucified on a Wednesday. Yes, on a Wednesday. His body was taken off the cross and laid in the tomb. We come back to this again tomorrow.